mynews.studio.
A single tariff, billions in energy deals, and an avoided trade war. Can this EU-US pact actually last?
Today is July 28, 2025. Let's dive straight in. The United States and the European Union have announced what's being described as a major trade agreement. It's a significant shift, 15% tariffs on most goods, which replaces both the old, lower rates and the much higher tariffs that were on the table during talks. But why settle at 15%?
It's really a compromise. Previously, tariffs averaged about 2.5%, but as tensions escalated, both sides were threatening tariffs as high as 50%. 15% is definitely higher than what most businesses are used to, but it's much lower than the numbers being threatened. And, importantly, it's consistent. No more patchwork of exceptions, apart from a few key sectors.
Right, but there are exceptions. Some agricultural products, beef, rice, ethanol, sugar, poultry, they're not included in the zero tariff group. Why were those carved out?
Those items are politically sensitive. Agricultural lobbies carry a lot of weight on both sides. For example, the U.S. wants greater access for its beef, but European farmers are hesitant. The same goes for rice and sugar. These carve-outs aren't new, but they do show that even in larger agreements, some sectors remain protected.
But for other agricultural goods, the zero for zero tariff still applies, doesn't it? Is that much different from past deals?
It is a change. Previously, exemptions were granted sector by sector. If you look back at the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, that one aimed to eliminate tariffs entirely, but it never took effect. This agreement doesn't go that far, but it does set a clearer baseline. The exclusions, though, leave room for future disputes.
Let's shift to those strategic purchases. $750 billion from the EU, mainly in energy and semiconductors. How firm are those commitments?
It varies. The government-backed energy deals are solid. Europe's looking to move away from Russian gas, and U.S. liquefied natural gas is an obvious alternative. But the projected $600 billion in European investment in the U.S., that depends on market conditions. If the U.S. economy slows, or if European companies find better opportunities elsewhere, those investments could fall short.
So some of this is enforceable, but a lot hinges on private companies and markets. If those investments don't come through, is there a real risk this agreement unravels?
There is. Another factor is that the agreement isn't legally binding yet. They're still drafting a formal joint statement and awaiting a U.S. executive order. Until those steps are done, it's more of a framework than an enforceable law.
And there are unresolved issues. Take wine and spirits. Still not settled. Plus, there's the question of non-tariff barriers and regulatory standards. Could those spark new disputes?
That's possible. Non-tariff barriers like labeling or safety standards are often flashpoints, even if tariffs themselves are set. If companies feel the rules are unfair, they'll pressure their governments to act.
Let's talk politics. Some in the EU see the 15% tariff as bowing to U.S. protectionism. In the U.S., critics argue the deal doesn't open EU markets enough for American agriculture or cars. Could this opposition threaten the whole agreement?
It could. The deal's survival depends on political will, especially with elections coming up, both in the EU and the U.S. If economic conditions change or one side feels shorted, the agreement might fall apart before it's fully rolled out.
Why should the rest of the world care about this?
Because together, the EU and US make up nearly half of global GDP. Their trade decisions affect supply chains, investments, and consumer prices around the world. By avoiding a trade war, they've reduced uncertainty for businesses and investors globally.
And on the diplomatic side, if these two can compromise, does that give hope for resolving other trade disputes? For example, with China or emerging markets?
Potentially. It demonstrates that negotiation and compromise are still possible, even in a divided global economy. But it all depends on follow-through. If this agreement collapses, it could deepen doubts about international cooperation.
So, to recap, there's a new EU-US trade framework, a uniform 15% tariff for most goods, major moves in energy and semiconductors, but big uncertainties remain, especially on implementation, sector carve-outs, and political risks.
And global markets are watching. This could bring stability, but only if both sides keep their promises.
Thanks for joining us as we broke down the EU-US trade deal and its global impact.
Thank you for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.